This last week, I was struck by a closing line in an article written by Mark Steyn that described the current situation politically around the globe as one of a strange allowance of politics to slightly change, but never enough to make a difference. He was speaking of the gains that the French far right, another silly spectrumization label that has major disconnect to the actual reality, made in their recent elections. As Mr. Steyn described, Marie Le Pen has moved to a much more centrist position on most things except immigration, yet is still branded with the scarlet letter of R for far right. And the pure terror of that terminology eliminates any candidate with that burnished brand from serious consideration for any leadership of meaning. Mr. Steyn went on to point out that the loss as a party came with the traditional ballyhoo about making historic gains to convert the loss into a PR win. But as Steyn wrote,
"So the far right will continue to make historic gains that are never quite historic enough. Because as I wrote previously, our rulers have decided that no changes to anything that matters can be permitted."
Observing the European elections in France and Great Britain, coupled with the abysmal debate in American politics between a failing mind and a villain from WrestleMania 6, it's overtly obvious that Mr. Steyn's premise is correct. Our rulers have no interest in seeing things ever change, and any placating of what appears to be change, like the historic gains in France, will be just enough to keep it one step short of violence. There's a fantastic thought by Sophocles that encapsulates the moment for me. Our ruling class have no interest in the base alloy of great leadership, which is humility. They find themselves addicted to the thought that they are the men and women made of better clay, and that any interest by the people to move in new directions, a hallmark of the democratic political process, is intolerable to them. They know better, and they will spend any energy necessary at the elimination of dissenting ideas. If one considers what Sophocles says about leadership, it is overly apparent that we live in a time where no leader currently in power embraces the humility it takes to make the change.
"All men make mistakes, but a good man yields when he knows his course is wrong and repairs the evil. The only crime is pride."
And yet, here we are. No person is willing to yield to the better ideas of the moment, and sadly, we've been here for 60 or more years. There's a complex of divinity that the current cabal of so-called leaders live in, where only their thoughts are the ones that can save the world from the existential threats that they've concocted. This battle is a permanent theater with a longer run than any Broadway show could dream of. What Sophocles was intimating was that virtue is the imperative for leadership and the democratic process. Without it, the only available path is the one we're on. Uniquely in this time, however, there seems a fear in the moment by the leaders that they're about to be exposed, and most anyone with enough intellectual honesty to say it out loud is seeing the crumbling for what it is. The Democratic National Committee has insisted that Joe Biden is a healthy, cognizant, capable leader, that at 82 years old will be a vibrant and electable alternative to Donald Trump. They even went as far as to parade him out on primetime television after 10 days of debate preparation in an effort to convince the public that he remains the most electable and salient candidate in the race as a Democrat. The results were disastrous, and even the most diehard of party devotees had to be honest about the degradation in the man's health and acumen. Donald Trump certainly looked better and more capable, just as a college basketball player might appear the better player in a matchup with a local elementary school YMCA star. But that does not make him the more capable leader of a country. His political problems remain, despite his performance, because of his response in COVID, his devotion to the vaccine, and his failure to drain the swamp as he insisted in his campaign he was going to do. The only capable person that has a reasonable shot at winning the presidency, Robert Kennedy Jr., was excluded from the debate for a multitude of reasons. His answers would have exposed what so many of us already understand, and both Joe Biden and Donald Trump would have looked the inferior player for the role they were auditioning for. This is an unacceptable option for the ruling class. Either mainline outcome for them is acceptable. If Trump is elected, he will be hamstrung by the deep state he does not understand, and the Democratic Party will be able to raise exorbitant amounts of money on the fear and loathing that his persona creates. If Joe Biden is elected, the puppeteering will continue, and the bureaucratic state will find great satisfaction in their capabilities at continuing the control of the government. Either of these options is acceptable to the permanent state. Certainly, celebrities can express their concern about what will happen if Donald Trump is reelected, but it will be as unsuspecting supporting actors in the ongoing theater. The ruling class has chosen in this moment to double down on their current methodology. They cannot allow alternative voices at the table. If they do, that aforementioned exposure that many people are seeing will be too evident to the majority of people, and their end will come quickly. As Sophocles described, the crime is pride. We live in a time in which the pride of man has overwhelmed any inclinations towards doing what is right. Both money and power have become inundatingly attractive to the people we elect. They are untrustworthy on the whole, and only a few people in the entire system stand out as capable leaders, willing to admit their mistakes and change directions. Politicians have failed to yield to the will of the people. We have a government overrun by debt, addicted to war, and sickly amalgamated with corporate money and power. Mussolini could only have imagined a fascist state so powerful as the one we live in. No presidential election will solve all the ills that our country and Western civilization face. Politicians and the state that they have built are, as Mr. Steyn describes, uninterested in permitting any change to their current status. I do, however, believe that our small movements towards better options is the sustaining path towards greater liberty in the future. I am an unapologetic supporter of Robert Kennedy Jr. for president. What he is saying is what the country needs if it has any hope to recover from the current state it's in. There's an image that I believe captures this moment of the American experiment. A solitary seed can take root in the most hostile of landscapes with a little luck and the simplest of conditions. Each seed that takes root changes the landscape from harshness to one teeming with life, and each new plant creates more opportunities for less hardy seeds to take hold. I believe there's a resiliency in the ideas that have made Western society that are allegorical to the plants that sprout amongst the brutality. I think those ideas cannot be extinguished by inferior and totalitarian movements. It may be bleak at times, but the ideas always provide hope. Just like that solitary little plant that's beating the odds in a landscape that appears harsh and dead, America just needs the right kind of seed to start to grow and reclaim what has been lost. As Americans, I think we often feel stuck in our political choices. Thankfully, this year's abysmal candidates, propped up by the main parties, are helping so many of us realize that there is a third way. Our founders found themselves in a similar moment when they were debating their departure from Great Britain and the King. Their generation consisted of people who thought completely different than each other. There were abolitionists from the North who were puritanical in their thoughts and behavior, and slaveholders from the South whose agrarian life and conditions led them to live antithetical lives to their northern cousins. Yet in the moment, the idea of liberty overcame their differences, just as I believe it will now too.